Hey there, quick question. Could you build a house from scratch if your life depended on it? No YouTube tutorials, no power tools, no team of vaguely handsome Australians with measuring tape and flannel shirts. Just your two hands, a muddy field, and a strong sense of, oh no. Tonight, we're rewinding the clock to the Middle Ages, a time when people built homes out of sticks, mud, hope, and whatever didn't run away when they reached for it. Welcome to the grim reality of peasant architecture, where the walls are crooked, the roofs are leaky, and the phrase open floor plan just means you don't own doors. Forget blueprints, forget building permits, forget everything you thought you knew about comfort, because this is DIY before the I knew how to D anything. So before we begin, maybe grab a blanket or a nice plank of wood, in case inspiration strikes. Let's build a house, badly. Congratulations, you're homeless. And it's the year 1310. There's no emergency shelter, no local council, no motivational podcast to help you rebuild. There's just you, a sack with 3 turnips in it, and a plot of land so damp it's thinking about becoming a pond. Your life savings consist of a wooden spoon, a single chicken, and a strong sense of denial. Welcome to medieval Europe, where building your own house isn't a passion project, it's a desperate scramble to not freeze to death. It's autumn, technically, but the sun hasn't shown up in 3 weeks, and the wind is whispering things like, "You're not gonna make it." The sky is grey, the ground is wet, and your fingers are already considering early retirement due to frostbite. You don't have a tent, you don't have a tarp, you don't even have a coat, just a wool tunic that smells like goat and trauma, and a prayer that maybe, just maybe, you'll figure out how to build a hovel before the snow arrives and turns your toes into crunchy regret. You've been given a scrap of land by your lord. Not out of kindness, mind you. It's a tax trap. You're expected to farm it, live on it, die on it, and leave it slightly worse for the next peasant. It's uneven, half mud, half rock, and currently occupied by a family of highly judgmental rabbits. You chase them off. You assert dominance. You immediately step into something warm and mysterious. There are no shoes, just soggy socks and hope. You have no tools, no saw, no nails, no toolbox. Your grandfather left you full of perfectly preserved wisdom. What you do have is a stick you found under a bush, a rock that kind of looks like a hammer if you squint, and a dream that refuses to die. You'll need to build everything from scratch, and by scratch, we mean scratch. Your skin, mostly, as fleas settle in and begin charging rent. You're not a builder, you're a peasant. Your resume includes knows how to dig, can survive on 1 onion per day, and has seen a chicken once. No one trained you in carpentry, there's no medieval YouTube, no helpful dwarf showing you how to raise a timber frame in 5 easy steps. There's just the memory of seeing your uncle build a shed once before it collapsed on him, and a distant, primal voice in your head screaming, "Stack sticks, stay warm." Step 1. Location. You need to pick a spot on your tiny plot that isn't prone to flooding, landslides, or ghost hauntings. Good luck. Every inch of land seems to actively resent you. You choose the least squelchy corner and mark it by poking the ground with a stick and declaring, with the confidence of someone who's never succeeded before, "Here, this will be my home." The wind immediately knocks your stick over. A crow laughs. The first night is rough. There's no house yet, just ambition and a pile of damp leaves. You huddle under a tree that's too small to help and too big to cut down with your current equipment level, which is rock. You don't sleep, you just close your eyes and listen to the forest hiss and gurgle. Something large snuffles near your turnips. You let it have one. You're not emotionally ready to fight a wild boar over root vegetables. By morning, you are deeply motivated by survival, and also mildly delusional from the cold. You start gathering whatever you can find: fallen branches, twigs, moss, resentment. You need to build a shelter, not a house. A shelter. Something that keeps the wind out, the rain off, and your slowly unravelling mind somewhat contained. You build a frame out of branches, leaning them together like a forgotten beaver dam. It looks awful. You cry. Then you reinforce it with mud and sheer spite. This process takes days. You have no nails, no rope, and nothing that would legally qualify as structural integrity. Every improvement feels like an argument with nature. Every time you make progress, something goes wrong. Your roof collapses. A pig tramples your wall. You accidentally build your latrine too close to your cooking area, and now you're questioning every choice you've ever made. You have a single clay pot, a knife that's more rust than blade, and your chicken keeps judging your construction techniques from a nearby stump. But slowly, so slowly, it begins to resemble shelter. Not a home, not yet. but something you can crawl into and pretend you're not utterly defeated by existence. You line the interior with grass and straw. It smells like wet goat. Everything smells like wet goat. You light a fire in the corner. It fills the hut with smoke. Your eyes sting. You open a gap in the roof for ventilation, which immediately invites rain. You close it. The fire goes out. Progress. You learn things, like how mud can become a wall if you apply it with enough desperation, or how to cut wood using a sharp rock and 1,000 bad decisions, or how roofs are not suggestions, they're obligations, and if you get it wrong, your ceiling will weep onto your face every single night. You learn to reinforce things with straw, to patch holes with moss, to scream into the wind when nothing works. It's character building, and sanity eroding. You steal some stones from a neighbour's fence to lay a foundation, not because you're cruel, but because you need to believe this will last longer than your last attempt. You arrange them carefully. They wobble. One sinks. You pretend not to notice. The walls are crooked. The doorframe is a myth. The roof is made of regrets and damp reeds, but it stands, sort of, on a good day if you don't look directly at it. And then, one night, while lying on your straw mattress that smells like mildew and broken dreams, you realise something. You have a house, a horrible, drafty, bug-infested box of suffering, but a house. And that's more than you had 2 weeks ago. The wind howls, the rain drips, something scurries under your floor. You whisper to yourself, "I live here now," and try not to cry on your mould pillow. You are no longer homeless. You are just medieval. So now you know the situation. You're cold, exposed, and your landlord is the weather. But fear not, your salvation is here, and it's made of filth. The building materials await: mud, sticks, cow dung, and other things that should never be near a pillow. Subscribe for more chaotic history. So, you've chosen to build a house in medieval Europe. Bold of you. You've got no budget, no blueprint, and your only assistant is a chicken who keeps pooping on your worksite. But don't worry, today you're going to learn about wattle and daub. A building method so humble, so filthy, so aggressively medieval, it basically screams, "I'll collapse in 5 years, but thanks for trying." Let's start with the basics. You want walls, right? Something to keep out the wind, the rain, the wolves, and your nosy neighbour who smells like boiled turnips and never stops talking about his second goat. But stone is expensive. Brick is witchcraft. And timber? Well, you need something to fill the timber frame. Something abundant, cheap, and naturally repellent to comfort. Enter dirt, and mud, and straw, and animal hair, and sometimes human hair. That's right, your future wall is part barnyard, part salon sweepings. Step 1. The wattle. This is your medieval wireframe. It's made by weaving thin wooden sticks, hazel, willow, or anything flexible and vaguely stick-shaped, between upright stakes. These stakes are known as stakes, because creativity died in the 1300s. You plant them in the ground in a row, leaving small gaps. Then you take your bendy rods and weave them over and under, back and forth, until it resembles a basket made by a drunk squirrel. Congratulations, you've made a fence. But vertical. This part is deceptively cheerful. You feel like you're doing crafts, like you're part of a wholesome pioneer fantasy. But don't be fooled. You're kneeling in mud, you're covered in splinters, your hands are bleeding slightly, and the entire time you're weaving, the wind is slapping you in the face with the smell of pig farts and damp straw. This is your life now. You are the human embodiment of effort with no reward. Once your wattle framework is complete, and by complete we mean it doesn't immediately fall over when you look at it, you move on to the magic ingredient, daub. The daub is the paste that fills the gaps and turns your twig puzzle into a wall. Now you might be thinking, paste, that sounds civilized. It is not. Daub is where dreams go to die. Daub is a sacred blend of whatever is available. Dirt, clay, straw, water, sand, hair, dung, yes, dung, cow dung, pig dung, horse dung, sometimes all three. It's less a building material and more of a spiritual experience. You don't mix daub with tools, you mix it with your feet, bare feet, because medieval footwear is either non-existent or worse than nothing. So you climb into a shallow pit of mud and manure and start stomping like you're trying to summon a demon from beneath the earth. And the smell. Oh, the smell. Imagine a compost bin. Now add warm water, fear, and a hint of rot. That's your daub. The good news? It's excellent insulation. The bad news? It takes weeks to dry, attracts insects, and will absolutely collapse if you build it wrong. Which you will. Because you're not a mason. You're a desperate peasant with no upper body strength and seasonal worms. Once your daub is sufficiently mixed, and by sufficient, we mean looks like a cursed milkshake, you begin slathering it onto your wattle. You use your hands, maybe a crude wooden trowel. You scoop up handfuls of steaming organic horror and slap it into place. It oozes through the gaps. It drips on your feet. It gets in your hair. If you're lucky, you won't ingest any. But luck left this village 3 plagues ago. You work section by section, smearing, pressing, praying. Each wall takes hours, maybe days, especially if you stop to cry every 20 minutes, which you do. Because building a house with poop-based glue is emotionally taxing. At some point, your cousin wanders over and helpfully points out that one wall is leaning like a drunk knight. You try to act grateful. You fail. You throw a lump of daub at him. He laughs. The wall collapses. You both scream. Eventually, through some combination of effort, rage, and divine indifference, the daub dries. It cracks a little. That's normal. You patch it with more daub. It cracks again. This is your life now. Eternal patching. Daub maintenance is like trying to hold back a flood with one very tired bucket. But at last, you stand back, wipe the muck off your hands, and gaze upon your work. The walls are rough, uneven, slightly steaming, but they're solid-ish. You did it. You made a house wall. One of them, anyway. Now, a word about additives. Some people like to add extra ingredients to their daub. Ashes to help bind it. Lime if they can afford it. Urine, for reasons science has never fully explained. These tweaks help, but they also add new smells. One local legend claims a woman added chicken blood to her daub for strength. Her house stood for 20 years. So did the curse. You're cool. You can also whitewash the walls once they're dry. This makes your hovel look slightly less like a barn explosion. The whitewash is made from lime, water, and crushed dreams. It helps seal the walls, deter bugs, and blind your enemies if the sun hits it just right. Plus, it makes you feel rich, which is hilarious, because you are not. Now, let's talk durability. A well-built wattle and daub wall can last decades. Can, most don't. The second it gets too wet, too dry, too windy, too anything, it starts to crumble. Rain eats it. Frost cracks it. A goat can kick a hole through it. Repair is constant. Every season you re-daub, repatch and re-hate your life. But for now, you rest. You lean against your semi-wall. It holds. That's a victory. And while we're here, let's appreciate how sustainable this all is. No factories, no emissions, just you, a pile of dirt, and the existential panic of not freezing to death. Modern architects would call this eco-friendly. Medieval peasants just called it Wednesday. It's biodegradable, locally sourced, ethically composted. Sure, it's also hideous and makes your house smell like a swamp witch's armpit. But who are you trying to impress? The tax collector? One more thing. If you live in a village, you don't build alone. You and your neighbours daub each other's houses like a team of traumatised barefoot masons. It's called cooperation, or survival. Sometimes both. You share mud pits, swap sticks, complain together, bond over your collective misery. If you're lucky, there's a jug of ale at the end of the day. If you're really lucky, someone's goat doesn't knock your whole wall over again. Looking at you, Beatrice. So there it is. Wattle and daub. The miracle method that combines basket weaving, poop science, and emotional breakdown into one unforgettable building technique. It's ugly, it's smelly, it's extremely flammable, but it works. Kind of. For a while. On a good day, in low humidity, you wanted a house, you got a biohazard with a roof. Welcome to medieval architecture. You've smeared mud into a wall and somehow it hasn't collapsed yet. Good. But mud needs structure. Bones, timber. And timber, sadly, does not fall from the sky. You're going to have to get a tree, and then regret everything. So you've got walls, sort of. Mud-filled, vaguely upright, held together by a mix of faith and feces. But now you need to think bigger, stronger, drier. You need wood, real beams, rafters, a frame that might not collapse the next time your goat sneezes too hard. You need trees. Congratulations. It's time to go lumberjacking in the 14th century. A career path with all the glamour of self-harm and none of the dental care. First things first. The tool. Singular. Because unless you're part of the nobility, and you aren't, your hovel is mostly edible. You own one axe. It's dull. It's rusty. It's possibly cursed. It's been passed down for generations, and no one ever sharpened it because medieval tool maintenance is more of a rumour than a routine. This axe has seen wars, plagues, probably your uncle's foot. It's not so much a cutting instrument as it is a blunt suggestion. You hold it up. It weighs as much as a sleeping pig and smells like old iron and regret. This is your Excalibur, only instead of pulling it from a stone, you'll be smashing it into one every 5 minutes by accident. The handle is cracked, the blade is chipped, but it's all you've got. So off you go, into the woods, to ruin your spine. Now, Finding a tree. You can't just pick any random sapling and yell timber like a medieval lumber influencer. You need the right tree. Something tall, straight, not already rotten, not occupied by bees. You're looking for oak, ash, elm, basically anything that hasn't already been stolen by the manor's carpenter or turned into a gallows. You wander through the woods, eyes darting, quietly praying that whatever you choose isn't secretly illegal. Because yes, in many places, felling trees from the Lord's forest is punishable by fines, imprisonment, or execution. Because even trees are owned by people richer than you. Eventually, you find a tree. It's big, intimidating, probably older than your entire village. You try to make peace with it. Apologize, maybe. Whisper something spiritual. The tree doesn't care. It knows you're weak. You raise your axe, swing with all your might, and hit the bark like a sad little drumstick. It barely dents. The tree laughs, internally. Tree felling in medieval times is not fast. It is not efficient. It is not safe. You don't have a saw. You don't have protective gear. You don't even have proper shoes. You just keep swinging that axe like a confused chicken trying to dig to hell. Blow after blow, hour after hour, you chip away at it. Your arms burn. Your back seizes. Your hands develop blisters the size of tragic little planets. You take breaks, not because you want to, but because your soul temporarily leaves your body to go look for a better host. There's no one to help. Your cousin promised he'd come, but he's off courting the miller's daughter with half a carrot and a dream. So it's just you, the tree, and the rapidly growing realization that you should have become a monk. At least monks get wine. And roofs. Eventually, after hours, maybe days, the tree starts to creak. It leans. You panic. You run. You trip over a root. You land face first in a pile of wet leaves, just in time to hear a thunderous crash that somehow misses your hovel-to-be by 3 feet and crushes your favourite sitting rock. R.I.P. You did it. You felled a tree. You are triumphant. Also, possibly concussed. Now comes the part no one warned you about, processing the tree. That's right, you don't just drag it home like a prize-winning fish and nail it to your wall. You have to cut it, strip it, shape it, de-limb it, de-bark it, de-regret your entire life. This process takes forever. Each branch is an act of violence, each log a personal vendetta, and you have no cart. So you drag the wood piece by piece, over mud, through brambles, across fields, while your feet quietly rot from the inside out. Once home, you must choose between greenwood and seasoned wood. Greenwood is freshly cut, full of moisture, easier to shape, but more likely to warp, bend, or collapse into mush if exposed to weather. Seasoned wood is dried, stronger, more stable, but harder to cut and extremely judgmental. Seasoning wood requires time, like months, sometimes years, which you do not have, because you are very much currently homeless. So, you make the classic peasant choice. Greenwood. You pray it holds. It probably won't. But hey, it's easier to pretend your roof beams are strong when you can still bend them by hand. You try not to think about what will happen when winter hits and everything starts shrinking, cracking, and falling apart like your emotional state. You split logs with a wedge and mallet, or another rock if you're low on luxury. You aim carefully. You miss. You hit your foot. The chicken watches with open disdain. You yell at the sky. The sky doesn't care. Eventually, after enough injuries to qualify as self-flagellation, you produce a few usable planks. They're uneven, rough, probably haunted, but they'll do. From here, you start assembling your frame. Uprights first, then crossbeams. Pegged together with wooden dowels, you hand carve using your one good tooth and some string. You have no ladder, so you climb things. Rocks, piles of mud, other logs. It's fine. OSHA won't be invented for another 700 years. You balance on a beam, hammering like a sleep-deprived squirrel, and immediately fall into a nettle patch. You emerge itchy, furious, and covered in ants. Progress. And the sound. Every time you hammer something into place, the frame groans like it's considering early retirement. You wedge joints tighter with wedges, add braces, whisper threats. Everything leans slightly to the left. You pretend it's intentional. Design choice, you mutter, as the chicken lays an egg in your sock pile. By the end of the week, you have something resembling structure. Timber uprights, a few horizontal beams, a vague suggestion of a triangle where the roof will go. It sways in the wind. One post is crooked. You jam a rock under it and pretend you didn't see. You've done it. You've raised a frame. Using trees you cut yourself, with tools made of sadness and iron. Your hands are calloused, your muscles scream, your joints sound like gravel in a sack. But when you step back and squint just right, ignoring the leaning walls and unintentional skylight, it almost looks like a house, or at least something that might be mistaken for shelter by a particularly optimistic squirrel. You've used greenwood, you've risked your limbs, you've yelled at nature and lost, but you've built something, a skeleton of survival, a wooden apology to the gods, a structure that says, I was here, I tried, please don't snow yet. Now go rest, you'll need your strength for the roof, which will absolutely ruin you. You've cut down a tree and your arms no longer work. Hooray, now you can build your house, assuming you plan to balance it on vibes. Because next comes the part that medieval builders treated with maximum optimism and minimal physics, the foundation. Welcome to the part of your medieval building journey where you finally ask the big structural question, what's holding this thing up? The answer is nothing, or more generously, mud, gravity, and your own self-delusion. Let's get one thing straight. Foundations, as modern builders know them, don't exist for you. You're not pouring concrete, you're not using rebar, you don't even have the word reinforcement in your vocabulary. You're a peasant. You've got a shovel shaped like a bent spoon, and a dream shaped like a future lawsuit. All you want is to keep your house upright for as long as it takes to die peacefully in your sleep instead of under a collapsing beam. Step 1. Choose a flat spot. Or rather, find one. Which is impossible because the world is lumpy and full of hidden rocks that exist solely to stub your toe and destroy your morale. So instead, you settle for the flattest looking patch of swampy despair on your allotted strip of serfdom. You test the ground by standing on it. It squelches. You nod solemnly. It'll do. Next, dig. Not deep. Just a little trench around where your walls will go. A few inches, maybe a foot, if you're feeling ambitious, and don't mind throwing out your back before your walls are up. There's no pickaxe, no mechanical digger, just you, a splintery spade, and soil so packed it might be classified as medieval cement. It's full of bugs, and roots, and possibly your neighbour's buried disappointment. You keep going. Eventually, you've got a shallow line in the earth. You step back to admire your trench. It immediately fills with water. Because your entire village is essentially a bog with social structure, you try to bail it out with a gourd. You fail, that's fine. You call it moisture proofing and move on. Now comes the stone part. Foundations need support, and that means rocks, not cut stone, not bricks, just rocks. Any size, any shape, preferably not still covered in moss and damp worms. You start gathering them from the surrounding fields. This is called gleaning, or stealing, depending on who's watching. Some of the rocks are large, you roll them, some are small, you pocket them. All of them are deeply offended by being moved. Once you've dragged enough rocks to your site to qualify as a makeshift Stonehenge, you start laying them in the trench. Not with mortar, not with levels, just eyeballs and willpower. You press them into the mud, wedge them together, and try to ignore the growing suspicion that none of them are actually flat. You stack them like a toddler playing Jenga during an earthquake. Gaps, stuff them with smaller rocks. Still gaps, throw in some straw. Still not even? Add more mud and lie to yourself. This is now your foundation. Technically, it's what your house will rest on for the next 10-15 years, assuming it's not immediately swallowed by the next heavy rain, or kicked over by a determined cow. You press down on one of the stones. It wobbles. You nod. Rustic, you whisper. Organic. A mouse scurries out from underneath. You do not make eye contact. Some villages use dry stone footings, a fancy way of saying rocks stacked with a sense of optimism. If you're lucky, someone older and more broken than you wanders over to help. They grunt at your trench, offer a rock, say something vague about frost heave. You nod like you understand. You do not. But now, your wall will probably last slightly longer. Maybe until your second child, maybe until breakfast. Other foundation options include timber sleepers, aka logs laid flat on the ground to act as a sort of base. These rot faster than your teeth and attract insects like free ale, but they're easy to build and easier to ignore until one collapses and drops your house corner 2 feet into the earth. Some people dig post holes and set their vertical beams straight into the soil. These people are known as the brave or the soon-to-be rebuilding. Oh, and drainage? Not happening. You're not installing a French drain, you don't have a French anything. What you have is a slight downhill slope, a hope that the rain flows away from your walls, and a healthy fear of mudslides. You may dig a shallow ditch, you may watch it fill with frogs and despair. Either way, your foundation is not keeping things dry. It is barely keeping things up. You learn to compensate. You keep your heaviest belongings on the high side of the room. You sleep with your feet slightly uphill. You patch the corners with more daub every spring. Your door frame sinks slowly over time until you start ducking instinctively when you walk in. It becomes part of the charm, or the trauma, or both. And let's not forget frost. When winter hits, the ground swells, shifts, and does everything in its power to remind you that human structures are temporary guests in the Earth's eternal chaos. Your walls creak, your stones heave, your chicken coop tips sideways. You pray the thaw doesn't reveal a giant sinkhole under your hearth again. But despite it all, the house stands. Your rocks, irregular, slippery, vaguely cursed, hold firm enough. Your trench becomes a shallow moat of soggy straw and well-fed slugs. Your walls, wattle and daub, masterpieces of structural anxiety, rest delicately on the geological equivalent of a shrug. But it works, in the loosest, dampest, most draft-infested sense of the word. And if it doesn't work, you fix it, or you rebuild it, or you cry. Probably all three. No one expects permanence. This isn't Rome. This is rural England, or northern France, or Saxony, or anywhere else where building a home is a battle between human need and nature's total disinterest. You are not building for eternity. You are building to survive the next 10 winters, 3 floods, and 1 goat-related incident. So you stand in your half-finished hut with its rock-lined edge and slightly tilting spine, and you nod to yourself. The foundation is in, the walls are going up, the roof is next. You try not to think about it. You try not to imagine what will happen the next time it rains for 5 days straight and the entire western wall decides to migrate south. For now, you did it. You built a medieval foundation, sort of. And that's good enough. Because in 1310, everything is kind of sinking anyway. Your house is now technically touching the ground. Congratulations. Time to add the walls. They won't be straight. They won't be strong. But they will be there, flaking mud, trapping heat, and giving rodents a cozy place to judge you. It's finally time to raise the walls. Not symbolically, literally. The parts that stop the wind from punching you in the face at 3 a.m. The parts that say home instead of open-air mistake. You're going to make a proper timber frame. You're going to weave wattle into it. You're going to daub it with something that could legally be described as a wall if the tax collector squints hard enough. You're going to build something you can point to and say, with mild confidence, that won't fall down. Probably. You start with your posts, vertical beams meant to support the weight of everything that's about to go wrong. You've already cut the trees, you've already cursed your way through transporting them, now you place them into shallow holes, or more likely rest them awkwardly on your rock foundation and hope nobody sneezes too hard. You prop one up, it leans, you brace it with another stick, it leans harder, you step back and squint, it looks like it's auditioning to become a trebuchet. This is fine. With much grunting and 1 minor hernia, you get 4 main posts upright. You connect them at the top with horizontal beams. This is called a box frame, and it is the medieval version of structural ambition with no adult supervision. You lash things together with strips of bark, rope made from hemp, or if things get really desperate, your cousin's belt. You add diagonal braces to stop it from swaying. It still sways. You call it flexible construction. Your neighbours come by to inspect your progress. One points at the frame and says, "You know that's not square, right?" You nod slowly and say, "Neither is life." He walks away in silence. The chicken nods in approval. Now you build the wattle, the woven twigs that fill the gaps between the timbers. It's time for crafts again. You gather hundreds of long, bendy rods. Willow is best, hazel is good. Random shrub branches you found while crying in a hedge will do in a pinch. You sharpen the ends. You weave them between vertical stakes you've driven into the frame, over, under, until each gap is filled with something that looks like a basket built during a nervous breakdown. It's actually kind of satisfying at first. You're doing something that vaguely resembles productivity. Your hands are scratched, your shoulders ache, but the wall is forming. It's lumpy, irregular, deeply suspicious, but it's a wall. You smile. The sun peeks through the clouds. A bird chirps. You start to believe, and then you remember. It's only half a wall, because now comes daubing again. The daub mixture hasn't changed. It's still clay, straw, dung, water, and pain. You mix it with your feet, in a pit that smells like disease and wet hope. You thought maybe this time it wouldn't be so bad. It is. It always is. The daub is sticky, cold, and vaguely alive. You scoop it up and start slapping it onto your lovely woven wattle. It seeps in. It sags. It falls out the other side like the world's worst frosting. You keep going. Daubing is about layers. First layer, thin smear. Second layer, thicker smear. Final layer, attempt to convince your neighbours that this counts as finished. You use your hands, a board, a trowel if you're lucky. You press the daub in, smooth it down, whisper soft threats to it. It holds. You take a step back. The wall exhales and sheds a chunk like a molting rat. This continues for days. You daub one wall, then another, then another. The weather shifts. The wind picks up. You try to speed up. The daub responds by falling apart faster. You cry a little. You sing old songs under your breath. Songs about strength and harvest and not living in structural despair. It helps. Not with the daub, but with your slowly dissolving sanity. Eventually, the walls are up. They are crooked, warped. One of them bows outward like it's trying to escape. You prop it up with a stick. Then another. Then you name the stick Hope. You know it's only a matter of time before it rains and the daub starts sweating mud onto your sleeping mat. But you don't say that out loud. The chicken already knows. Now it's time for plastering. This is the final skin of the wall, the bit that makes it look less like a medieval compost heap and more like something a human might willingly sleep next to. If daub is the meat, plaster is the band-aid. A very fragile, crack-prone band-aid. It's made from lime and sand, if you're lucky enough to have access to something resembling a quarry, a kiln, and a small miracle. Otherwise, you're left with more clay, straw, and tears. Basically, the medieval version of DIY spackle. You mix it in a bucket, if you own one that hasn't been stolen by your neighbour for their ale brewing. If not, you make do with a broken pot you rescued from the dung heap. Or, failing that, you mix it right in your hands like a mud pie from the world's worst kitchen. You slap it on the walls in a manner that can only be described as desperate enthusiasm. It cracks, immediately. You patch it. It cracks again. It's like the wall is actively mocking your efforts at civilization. You sigh. That's normal. That's life. You do it anyway because otherwise you'll freeze when the wind comes through the daub like it owns the place. Plastering makes the walls look cleaner, smoother, more intentional, like you meant to build this place and didn't just wake up one morning in a puddle of regrets with a pile of sticks leaning on a rock. And if you're feeling particularly fancy, or delusional, you can whitewash it later. If you have enough lime, or if you can find a chalk deposit nearby, and the time to grind it down while crying quietly into your tattered cloak. Whitewash is the final touch, a thin coat of dignity over the screaming cracks of reality. You do it because that's what everyone does, because in the end, all the cracks are hidden, for a moment, behind a coat of hope and wishful thinking. Some people paint symbols on their walls, protective marks, sacred shapes, the medieval version of live, laugh, love. You draw a circle. It turns out lopsided. You turn it into a snake. It still looks bad. You stop drawing. By now your house has 4 walls. They bulge. They leak slightly. They creak in the wind like they're whispering about you behind your back. But they exist. They stand. Mostly. You take a moment to lie down on your floor, which is still dirt, and stare at the ceiling, which does not yet exist. You tell yourself you're halfway there. The chicken steps on your face. But here's the thing. This is progress. This is real. You built walls with your own hands, with sticks and muck and blind faith. And yes, they're uneven. Yes, your corner leans like a drunk bishop. Yes, one of your neighbours came by and said, "That looks like it's been cursed," but it's yours, your first storm shelter, your first set of flammable rectangles. You light a small fire to dry the daub. The smoke fills the room instantly. There's no chimney yet. You cough violently, eyes streaming, ears ringing. You open the door, which is just a hole. Air rushes in, smoke rushes out. The wall shifts slightly. You stare at it for a long time. It settles. You decide not to think about it anymore. That night, you sleep under your new walls. The wind howls. The plaster cracks. Something scuttles across your leg and into the darkness. You whisper, "I live here now," and try to believe it. The chicken curls up next to you. You pretend it's on purpose. So yes, the walls went up, eventually, badly, crookedly. They're not perfect. They're not even good. But they're yours. Built with desperation, held together by mud and maybe a small prayer. They probably won't last forever. or even all winter, but they're better than nothing. And in the Middle Ages, better than nothing is basically luxury real estate. The walls are up and slightly tragic. Good news, you won't freeze sideways anymore. Bad news, you're still going to get wet. Now it's time to talk roofs, how to build one, how fast it rots, and how many mice will move in before you do. So, your walls are up, they're not great. One of them whistles in the wind, and two others look like they're trying to quietly collapse without bothering you. But they're there. And now you must confront the final soul-sucking architectural hurdle, the roof, that magic layer of false hope between you and the eternal damp. The part of the house that says, sure, we'll keep the rain out, while actively funneling it onto your bed like some kind of medieval joke. In theory, roofs should inspire confidence. They should protect, shelter, comfort. Yours will do none of these things, because your roof is going to be made of straw, and not the romantic, golden, sun-kissed kind you see in illustrations. No, this is patchy, musty, mouse-infested roof straw, and it's about to become your new worst friend. Let's begin with the shape. Medieval roofs are steep, like worryingly steep. Why? So the rain runs off quickly. Also, because flat roofs in this climate are basically puddles with ambition. You're going for a simple A-frame. Nothing fancy, nothing symmetrical, just two slanted sides that might, if the gods are feeling generous, shed rainwater instead of absorbing it like a sponge wearing a hat. You start by building a roof frame. This involves hauling more wood onto your wall frame, timbers you cut yourself with your sadness axe. You place the ridge beam across the top and start fixing angled rafters to either side. Each one is a wobbly guess at geometry. Each one is slightly too long or slightly too short. The fifth one collapses while you're standing on it. You fall into your own floor. The chicken stares down at you like, "You okay?" You are not. Eventually, after 3 splinters, 2 bruises, and 1 argument with gravity, you have a roof frame. It sways in the wind. It creaks at night. But it's up there. You add horizontal slats across the rafters to support the thatch. These are called roof battens, and you install them by tying or pegging them into place while balanced on your own terrible craftsmanship. It's a little like tightrope walking, but instead of applause, you get shin cramps and the creeping knowledge that this whole thing might fall on your head tomorrow. Now, let's talk thatching. That's the traditional roofing material you're stuck with, unless you live near a forest and know a guy who'll illegally sell you shingles behind the blacksmith's shop. Thatch is made from straw, reeds, or rushes, depending on what's available. Most likely, it's straw from last year's harvest. If you don't have any, you beg your neighbour for leftovers. He gives you a pile that's 40% straw and 60% miscellaneous organic matter. You thank him anyway. Thatching is hard. Not glamorous hard. Not I built this with my bare hands hard. Just tiring, fiddly, deeply thankless work. You start at the bottom of the roof and work your way up, laying bundles of straw across the battens. You secure them with spars, pointy wooden pegs twisted into place like little sad anchors of denial. You pack the bundles tight. Water shouldn't get through. Shouldn't. But it does. Because nothing medieval peasants built was waterproof. Not really. You keep thatching. Day after day, straw after straw. The bundles itch. The pegs stab. You drop things. You yell. You bleed. You try to sing like the old folks used to do during communal builds, but all that comes out is a raspy grunt that startles your goat. You eat cold porridge. You lose feeling in your fingertips. You keep thatching. You finish one side. The next day, the wind rips off half your bundles. You scream into the horizon. It doesn't answer. You try again. This time, it holds. Sort of. You do the other side. By the end of the week, the entire roof is covered in straw. It's uneven. It's lumpy. It looks like a wet haystack someone tried to teach architecture to. But it's a roof, technically. You stand back and look at your work. You built it yourself, from nothing, using mud, sticks, and quiet despair. You should feel proud. But you can already see a small hole forming near the ridge. You sigh. You climb back up with more straw. Patch it. Again. You accept the truth. Thatching is never finished. It just waits for the next storm to undo everything you've done. And now comes the part no one talks about. The rot. Your roof, unless maintained religiously, will rot. It holds moisture. It harbours mould. It invites fungus. Every time it rains, your ceiling becomes a sponge. Every time it dries, the fibres shrink and shift. You patch, you pray, you fail. It's a never-ending cycle of temporary success and inevitable dampness. And rodents. Oh, the rodents. Thatch is a 5-star hotel for rats, mice, birds, and anything else small enough to squeeze between your reeds and build a nest. You hear them at night, scritching, chewing, whispering dark secrets. Sometimes you see bits of your thatch falling down as they tunnel through it. You lie awake and listen to your ceiling be eaten. You name one of the rats. He becomes your landlord. Some people try to protect their thatch with netting, but you can't afford netting, or nails, or a sense of safety. So you just stomp around a lot and occasionally poke the roof with a stick and yell, "Get out, it doesn't work." They know it's your house, but they also know it's barely yours. You're just squatting in your own failure. Still, for all its flaws, thatch has benefits. It insulates well, it's cheap, it's light, you can repair it with your own hands. And when the sun hits it just right, and the birds aren't screaming, and the rain hasn't come yet, it almost feels cozy, temporary, fragile, but cozy, like a blanket made of grass and lies. By spring, you'll be patching it again. By autumn, you'll be cursing it anew. But for now, it works, mostly. And that's what being a medieval peasant is all about, mostly. Your house mostly stands. Your food mostly keeps. Your roof mostly doesn't fall in while you're asleep. You call that winning. You lie down on your straw bed, under your straw roof, and listen to it creak in the breeze. You close your eyes and tell yourself it's just the wind. Not mice, not rain, not the distant sound of thatch slowly decaying like your remaining optimism. You're warm. You're dry. You're absolutely going to fix that leak tomorrow. Probably. Your roof may be barely holding up, but now you want light. Oh, sweet summer surf. Light is for the rich. You, my friend, are getting a pig bladder window and a lifetime subscription to seasonal affective disorder. Let's be honest, your house is a box, a muddy, crooked, rodent-occupied box. And now that you've got walls and a roof, both of which are held together by lies and livestock hair, it's time to ask, what about windows? And the answer is, what about them? You don't have windows. You have openings, and even those are more of a risk than a feature. In 1310, windows are a luxury, an upper-class indulgence, a literal hole in your house that says, I can afford to lose heat and keep glass animals alive. You are not that person. You are a peasant. You wake up with straw in your mouth. You share your bed with a chicken and a moral injury. If you want light in your house, you open the door. If you want air, you go outside. If you want a view, you're clearly not paying enough taxes. Let's define a window in medieval peasant terms. A window is a small rectangular void in the wall that exists to do two things: let in some natural light and let out all your warmth, security, and will to live. There's no glass. Glass costs more than your entire wardrobe and possibly your spouse. There's no insulation, no sealant, just a roughly hacked hole in the daub, probably framed with wood that's warping in 3 directions at once. To close your window, you use a shutter. This is a thin plank of wood, maybe 2 if you're feeling decadent, attached with leather hinges, rusty nails, or sheer willpower. The shutter never quite fits. It rattles in the wind. It lets in the rain. It probably leaks air even when closed, because carpentry is hard when your tools are rocks and your teacher was an angry uncle who once yelled at a fence. In summer, the window opening is a relief. Sunlight. Air, a faint breeze that doesn't smell like your floor. You enjoy it for about 10 minutes. Then you realise it also lets in flies, bees, bats, pigeons, your neighbour's screaming child. You try to cover it with a cloth. It immediately gets torn down by a cat. You try again with rush mats. The wind removes them. You give up and call it natural ventilation. But in winter, that's when the window becomes your sworn enemy. It lets in cold, damp, the sound of wolves. You shut it, stuff straw into the cracks, nail it shut, wrap it in spare linen, and still the frost sneaks in like a ghost with a grudge. You consider bricking it up entirely. Some people do. They decide they'd rather live in total darkness than let a single draught touch their ankle again. You respect them. You start to become them. And what about glass, you ask? Let's talk about glass. Actual, transparent, fancy person glass is rare. If you see it in your lifetime, it's in a church or a lord's manor. Rich people use glass like it's magic. Because it is. It's expensive, fragile, and custom blown. You, however, get the peasant version. Oiled parchment, greased linen, horn panels, and, yes, pig bladders. Dried, stretched, scraped thin, and rubbed with oil until translucent. Congratulations. Your window now smells like pork and lets in approximately 6% of the available light. It doesn't work well. It warps. It stains. It filters sunlight in the same way mud filters wine, poorly and with resentment. It's also a fire hazard. Everything in your home is a fire hazard, but this one hangs at head height and melts when it gets too close to your hearth. And if you break it, you don't fix it. You replace it with cloth, then straw, then resignation. But let's assume, against all odds, that you've made yourself a decent little window. You installed a shutter. You layered it with greasy parchment. It's not good, but it's something. What does this get you? Well, first, seasonal depression. Because even when it works, your window doesn't let in much light. And that's fine in July, when the sun rises at 4 a.m. and lingers lovingly until 10 at night. But come November, it's dark, it's damp, it's quiet in the bad way. The light that filters through your pig bladder pane is grey, hesitant, and slightly offended. It doesn't illuminate so much as hover, like a ghost that doesn't want to be here either. You try to work by it. You sit at your little table and try to sew or whittle or look thoughtful. But you can't see anything. You squint, you light a candle, it blows out. You light it again. The wax is animal fat, the smell is medieval. You give up and go outside, where at least the gloom has more space to breathe. Inside, your window casts strange shadows. The uneven light bounces off rough daub and twisted beams and makes your hut look like a crime scene from a fairy tale. Sometimes you think you see movement. You don't. Or you do. Either way, the rats love it. They sit in the shaft of light and bask, smug and warm. You whisper, "Must be nice," and move on with your day. And then there's security. Your window is also a hole in your house that lets people in. People like thieves, or tax collectors, or Jeff from 2 fields over who keeps trying to sell you mouldy turnips. At night, you block it. Not because it helps, but because it feels like you're trying. You stack baskets against it. Hang wet clothes in front, sleep with one eye open. Medieval peace of mind. So what's the solution? There isn't one. Windows are a paradox. You need them. You hate them. You wish you had better ones. You know you never will. So you do what peasants have always done. Cope, patch, layer, curse the wind. Thank the rare day when sunlight comes through and the smoke isn't too thick and your house doesn't feel like a coffin someone forgot to bury. You think about building a second window. Then it rains. The shutter creaks. The wind howls. You stare at your lone pig bladder pane, warped and sagging like a medieval contact lens, and decide one is enough. One is always enough. Light may be scarce, but cold drafts and wild animals are not. Which brings us to the medieval concept of home security, a wooden slab that mostly stays shut if you kick it hard enough. At last, we come to the final piece of your peasant panic box, the door. The thing that separates inside from outside. The part of your house that says, yes, someone lives here, and no, you may not come in unless you're invited, friendly, or a chicken. Of course, in 1310, door is a generous word. It implies something solid, purposeful, reasonably aligned with its own frame. You will not be getting any of that. What you will be getting is a slab of wood held together by hope, swinging awkwardly on a pair of homemade hinges and closing just well enough to keep the larger predators confused. Let's start with materials. You have wood. Rough, green, half-warped planks you split by hand using your sadness axe and a wedge you found under a bush. You don't have nails. You don't have screws. You certainly don't have a cute little wrought iron knocker shaped like a lion. You've got rope, maybe some pegs, and your own 2 trembling hands. You line up the planks, some are thick, some are thin, some curve in ways that defy both physics and taste. You lash them together with strips of bark, rawhide, or rope made from twisted plant fibre. It's not pretty, it's not symmetrical, it's not even straight, but it is heavy, and when you lean it against your door frame, it makes a satisfying thunk, the sound of something trying its best under deeply disappointing circumstances. Now, the hinges. In your dreams, they're metal, forged by a blacksmith who knows what he's doing and hasn't been drunk since sunrise. In reality, they're more likely wooden pegs jammed into holes, acting less like hinges and more like sad pivot points. They creak. They stick. One snaps on the first day and drops the door on your foot. You scream into your pig bladder window. The chicken does not care. If you're lucky, or wildly over-prepared, you use strap hinges, long metal pieces that spread the weight of the door more evenly. They cost about 3 weeks' worth of food, or a trade involving 1 goat and the promise not to date the blacksmith's daughter. If you manage to get them, you still need to affix them to the frame. You do this with handmade nails, hammered in slowly and unevenly until the hinge almost lies flat. Then you test the swing. It works, mostly, on Tuesdays, if the humidity is low. The door opens, the door closes. But does it stay closed? No, of course not. Because gravity is not your friend and your house is settling like a deflating cow. The door wants to swing open on its own. Or worse, it wants to not open when you're trying to run from a wasp the size of a plum. So you invent a latch. What is a latch, you ask? It's whatever you have lying around. A bent stick, a loop of leather, a wooden bar that drops into a notch. Medieval latching systems are less about security and more about convincing the wind to leave you alone. A common method, the drop bar. You mount a horizontal beam across the inside of the door. When you close it, the bar falls into place and physically blocks the door from opening outward. Great for keeping things out. Terrible if you need to get out fast. Say, if your roof catches fire, again. Some people install a string latch where a rope tied to the inside latch runs through a hole in the door and can be pulled from the outside. Perfect for when you forget your key, which doesn't exist. But this also means anyone else can pull the same string, like thieves, or wolves, or your cousin Jeff, who thinks it's funny to sneak in and eat your bread. So what about locks? Hilarious question. Locks are for people with property worth securing. You own a goat, 3 turnips, and a knife that's 80% rust and 20% tetanus. Still, you can dream. Some clever peasants craft wooden locking mechanisms, complex little puzzles of levers and catches that baffle everyone except the child who accidentally figures it out in 5 seconds. Others install iron locks if they somehow convinced a blacksmith to take pity on them, or were incredibly good at bartering root vegetables. Most of the time, though, you just bar the door and hope for the best. If you hear something outside, you pray it's the wind. If you hear something inside, you pray it's not still there. You get used to the creaks, the rattles, the feeling that your front door is less a barrier and more of a gentle suggestion. And then there's the smell. Your door doesn't just keep things out, it keeps things in. Heat, smoke, odours. Your house is a sealed box of wool, dung, stew fumes and despair. If you open the door too often, the warmth escapes. If you leave it closed too long, the air inside starts to evolve its own personality. You try to balance. You crack it open. The wind howls through the gap like a choir of angry ghosts. You slam it shut. The latch sticks. You kick it. The bottom falls out. You scream. Also, doors warp. Moisture seeps in. Wood swells. Suddenly, your once functional portal becomes a puzzle box with no solution. You push, it sticks. You pull, it scrapes the ground. One day, it just won't open. You climb out the window instead. The rats mock you from the rafters. The chicken follows you out like a traitor. But despite it all, the door is yours. Your entrance, your barrier, your final defense against wolves, thieves, wind, and social obligations. It's ugly. It's cracked. It smells like wet oak and bitter hope. But you built it. You lash the latch. You test the swing. You lean against it and feel, just briefly, safe. Or as safe as anyone can feel in a flammable mud house in the middle of a plague century. You tuck in for the night. The door is shut. The bar is in place. The latch is looped. It's quiet. Almost peaceful. And then, just as you drift off, you hear it. A creak, a rattle, a breath of wind pushing at the gap. The door jiggles. You open one eye. You whisper, "Not tonight." You roll over. The smell stays in. The wolves stay out, mostly. Now that your door creaks like an omen and your windows are pigskin, let's shift our attention downward, to the floor, or rather, the ongoing organic experiment that grows beneath your feet and smells like 3 centuries of regrets. You've built walls, you've raised a roof, you've lashed together a door and pretended it closes, you've endured straw, daub, rot and rodents. And now, you finally glance downward, only to realise something no one warned you about. Something primal, unavoidable, unforgivable. You don't have a floor, you have earth. And that's being generous. See, unlike castles and cathedrals, and literally any structure meant to survive more than a single angry winter, your house doesn't have stone flagging or wooden planks or a nice rug from the east. Your house has dirt, the same dirt you walked in on, and you're going to keep walking on it, forever, with your feet, with your sadness, with your chicken. If you're lucky, it's packed dirt. Firm, compressed, mostly level, only slightly bumpy. If you're not lucky, it's loose, crumbly, moist, and occasionally smells like it remembers being a latrine. Either way, this is your floor. You don't mop it, you don't sweep it, you stare at it. It stares back. You step on it and pray that your sock, if you have one, doesn't come back up moist. Now, you might be thinking, surely they covered it with something. Yes, and that something was rushes. Let's talk about rushes. These are long, reedy plants cut from riverbanks and marshes, gathered in bundles, and strewn across the dirt to act as a kind of medieval carpet substitute. That's the theory. In practice, it's more like throwing hay over a damp path and calling it comfort. You scatter rushes over the floor in a semi-even layer. They crunch, they poke. They don't actually cushion anything, but they do absorb things. Oh, do they absorb? See, the rushes go down once, and then they stay. For months, sometimes years. You don't replace the rushes, you just add more on top, over and over, until what you're walking on isn't so much a floor covering as it is a living, composting biolayer of crushed plants, crumbs, ashes, spilled soup, spilled beer, nail clippings, dead bugs, bits of that rat you tried to chase out last Thursday, and somewhere, in the bottom strata, the original rushes you put down 2 winters ago. And the smell. Oh, the smell. It's layered. It's mature. It's the olfactory equivalent of regret. The rushes don't stay clean. They can't. Every day you trudge in and out, your boots full of mud, your livestock tracking in filth, your kids dropping turnips and lies. And remember, there is no drainage. The floor doesn't slope. The moisture doesn't go anywhere. It just sits, festers, evolves. Also, your animals live with you. You share this house with a goat, 2 chickens, and possibly a pig. They do not respect the rushes. They use them. So yes, you are standing in something. What exactly changes daily? Occasionally, if someone dies or an important guest comes over, a priest, a bailiff, someone with enough authority to judge your filth, you might replace the rushes, or rather, peel off the top 3 inches of grime and throw it into the yard. Beneath it, you find the original dirt floor again, soaked, imprinted with the outline of where your cousin spilled fish stew in 1308, and faintly steaming, you scatter new rushes. You breathe in the momentary illusion of freshness. It lasts until someone drops a chamber pot. There are variations. Some homes use herbs in the rushes, lavender, sage, thyme, to improve the smell. This is the medieval version of lighting a scented candle in a gas leak. Pleasant, but irrelevant. Others mix straw with the rushes, which sounds nice until you realise straw rots faster and invites even more insects. Some very advanced households might use wooden slats or planks raised slightly above the dirt, which is adorable, expensive, and only useful if you enjoy the luxury of not smelling your own house. You do not. Now let's talk about bugs. Your rushes are a 5-star, all-inclusive paradise for fleas, lice, mites, beetles, weevils, and anything else that enjoys warm, decaying plant matter. Think of it as a medieval Airbnb for everything that bites. You don't see them, you feel them, crawling, hopping, skittering, whispering tiny bug-sized secrets into your socks. You try to sweep them out with a broom that's seen better centuries. You fail, you try to set a fire nearby and hope they evacuate like sensible guests. They don't. They bring friends, entire extended families, possibly in-laws. They throw a party under your blanket and dance on your legs like it's the festival of itch. You accept them. They are part of the floor now. You give them names. You consider charging them rent, but no one's paying. They're home too. Then there's the cold. Dirt doesn't insulate. It's a medieval open concept disaster plan. In winter, your floor is ice, hard, unforgiving, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and builds a small, permanent home there. In spring, it's mud, a living, breathing, squelching swamp that sucks at your toes and leaves you with ankles that smell like every farmyard horror story you've ever heard. In summer, it's dust, a thin, choking film that floats around the room like it's auditioning for the role of most unwanted houseguest. And in autumn? Well, autumn is special. It's all 3. Ice at dawn, mud by noon, dust by dusk, like a seasonal festival of disappointment. You sleep close to the ground, very close, because beds are for the rich, or at least the reasonably comfortable. Your mattress is rushes that compress into an unholy pancake of damp disappointment. You wake up every morning with a stiff back, one cold foot, and possibly a frog in your armpit. You don't scream. You don't even flinch. Frogs are basically roommates now. There's no fixing this. You pile more rushes on top like a sad, crunchy lasagna. They compress too. You add more. The floor slowly rises to meet you like a time-lapse of your own resignation. One day, you'll wake up, hit your head on the rafters, and realise your bed is now the ceiling. Congratulations, you've invented the bunk bed. But the most terrifying thing about the floor isn't what's in it, it's how normal it becomes. You stop noticing the filth. You step over puddles without thinking, too tired to ask what they are. You scrape something soft off your heel and pretend it was just a piece of cheese. Your children make nests in the rushes like feral squirrels. The chicken lays eggs in the corner. One of them hatches. You name the chick Floorbert. Floorbert is now part of the family. This is your floor, a swampy, squishy, insect-riddled patch of compressed biology masquerading as stability. You sweep it with a broom made from bundled sticks that's about as effective as sneezing at the rain. You shift the top layer occasionally to give the illusion of cleanliness, but it's like rearranging deck chairs on a very soggy Titanic. You try not to think about how long it's been since you saw actual dirt under the layers of straw, feathers, hair, and what you sincerely hope is just a turnip. You tell yourself that everyone's floor is like this, which is true, comforting, horrifying, and the worst part, one day you'll visit someone who has a plank floor, dry, smooth, barely smells like anything. You will stand in their home, blinking like a cave creature, and think, so this is what heaven is made of. Then you'll go back home, step inside, crunch, squish. Floorbert chirps from the corner, proud and unbothered. You sigh. The floor is what you're standing on. It always has been. It always will be. So your floor is a compost heap and your feet are numb. Time to warm things up, gently, dangerously, and with a fire that will either save your life or smoke you out like a ham. Now that your mud walls are weeping, your thatch is rustling with rodents, and your floor squelches with every step, it's time to tackle one last crucial question. How do you heat this glorious disaster of a home without reducing it to a smouldering pile of peasant ash? The answer is barely. Maybe. With fire and fear. Let's begin with the hearth, the warm heart of your freezing, muddy hut. In modern terms, this would be a fireplace, something clean, intentional, surrounded by stone and respect. In your house, it's more of a fire pit, literally a pit. Dug into the middle of your dirt floor, rimmed with a few stones, filled with half-burnt logs, unburnt dreams, and the occasional chicken feather. You don't light it for ambience. You light it because your teeth are starting to chatter in Morse code. There is no chimney. That's not a thing yet. Not for you, anyway. Chimneys are expensive, structural, forward-thinking. You are none of those things. So the smoke goes up into the rafters, where it hangs like a ceiling-mounted fog machine with depression. In theory, it finds its way out through the smoke hole, a charming, jagged opening in the roof designed to not quite work. You've made it by removing a thatch bundle and hoping the weather stays polite. Sometimes you add a little flap made of cloth, hide, or flat desperation to stop the rain from falling in while still letting smoke out. It doesn't help. On windy days, the smoke comes right back down and punches you in the lungs like an angry ghost with asthma. You sit beside your hearth, coughing quietly, eyes watering, body steaming from the inside out. Everything smells like fire. Your clothes, your walls, your goat. You haven't seen the back of the house in days because the smoke layer starts at shoulder height and grows denser the longer the fire burns. You crawl around like a battlefield survivor just to find the stew pot, which, by the way, now tastes like oak. But it gets worse, because fire needs fuel, and fuel is a luxury. Wood is heavy, rare, and legally complicated. You're technically not allowed to cut it from the Lord's forest, which is 100% of the forest. So you gather fallen branches, twigs, bits of fence that fell over, dried brambles. One time, you burned your shoe and didn't regret it. Every day is a new experiment in what can be set alight without invoking a forest spirit or a fine. Some villages rely on peat, slices of decomposed plant mush dug from bogs, dried until they're sort of flammable, and burned with a smell best described as wet grave. Others use dung cakes, yes, cow dung, mixed with straw, patted into sad little patties, and left to dry until they burn with a faint hiss and the aroma of long-term compromise. These fuel sources don't blaze, they smoulder. You sit beside them like a moth begging for warmth, coughing like you're training for a medieval lung competition. And fire doesn't stay put, because why would it? Your hearth is in the middle of a flammable box. Your roof is thatch, your floor is rushes, your furniture is wood. Everything inside your home has a secret dream of becoming part of a blazing obituary. You're constantly on edge. You don't leave the fire alone. You keep water nearby, stored in a clay jug, or a bucket if you're fancy. And you watch the embers with the suspicion of someone who's already had to explain one mysterious singe mark to the bailiff. Sometimes the fire escapes. A spark lands on the rushes. You stomp it out. You panic. You shout. Everyone coughs louder. You throw half your stew on the floor. The fire dies. You weep. You eat the remaining stew, now with extra ash and adrenaline. To cook, you suspend a pot over the fire using a trivet, hook, or bent iron bar that once belonged to a plough. You rotate it manually, hoping nothing tips over. Some setups have a built-in hearthstone ledge. Yours does not. You balance things on rocks. One of them cracks. The pot spills. You watch your dinner seep into the floor and become part of the smell layer. The chicken investigates. Sometimes you try to bank the fire at night, bury the embers in ash so they last until morning. It works, kind of. You wake up to a cold hut, a smoking pile of coal crumbs, and your left eyebrow mysteriously gone. You pretend not to notice. You've learned to stop looking in reflective puddles. Smoke also blackens everything. Your beams, your daub, your soul. You can't see your ceiling anymore. It's coated in soot so thick it may now qualify as a second roof. Every time someone walks in, they cough like they've entered a trial by air. You don't notice anymore. Your lungs have developed a protective crust. You call it evolution. But here's the real problem. You need fire every day. Not just for warmth, for cooking, for boiling water, for drying clothes, for surviving. It is both your saviour and your slow undoing, a blessing and a threat, a flickering reminder that you are always one ember away from losing everything, including your goat, your stew, and your fragile mental state. And you can't move it. There's no portable heater, no second room. The hearth is the centre of the house. You live around it, you sleep near it, you trip over it at night and burn your foot. Your child once roasted a turnip in it unsupervised and invented a new kind of ash. The chicken sleeps dangerously close. You've warned her. She ignores you. Eventually, you consider improving your hearth. Maybe raising the edges with more stone so embers don't skitter across the floor like tiny flaming assassins. Maybe adding a chimney flue so the smoke has somewhere to go besides your lungs. Or even walling off a little alcove to trap the heat, because sharing warmth with the entire neighbourhood through your thatch roof isn't exactly a winning strategy. But that's expensive, complicated. You'd have to bribe a mason, if you could even find one who's not busy building Lord What's-Its new wine cellar. Or sell your pig, which is already family at this point. Or marry someone with a dowry that includes mortar, which is somehow even less romantic than it sounds. You decide to just keep coughing. It's cheaper. So every evening, you tend the fire like it's your one friend who's both comforting and also likely to betray you at any moment. You feed it kindling, you poke the embers, you blow gently and try not to inhale anything that might kill you. The room glows, flickers, smokes. It's a medieval light show sponsored by asthma. You sit in the warmth, staring through the haze like a philosopher on a budget. You almost feel safe. You imagine for a moment that you have control over this tiny, smoky sun. Then a spark jumps out. You scream, you stomp. The fire wins again. You wipe the soot from your nose and remind yourself that a little indoor smoke is good for the sinuses. You tell yourself it's cozy. You lie. But lying is free, and you've gotten very good at it. The fire is lit. The smoke is hanging in your lungs. Now it's time to furnish your masterpiece. If by furnish you mean shove some hay in the corner, throw a stool at the hearth, and give up halfway through a curtain. Because nothing says home like flammable materials, uneven furniture, and the faint but ever-present smell of last night's regrets. Welcome to your medieval living space. You've got walls, a roof, a smoky hearth that occasionally tries to kill you in your sleep. The wind no longer whistles directly across your face while you dream. Congratulations, you have reached the pinnacle of 14th century interior design. Now comes the fun part, furnishing it. And by furnishing, we mean finding stuff to sit on, sleep on, store things in, and not catch fire accidentally. No matching sets, no coordinating textiles, no accent wall. You've got dirt, wood, straw, and the ongoing presence of livestock. Time to get cozy. Let's begin with the bed, which is technically a rectangle in the corner with hay on it. There's no mattress, no frame, just straw, possibly on a raised wooden platform if you're fancy, or just a pile on the floor if you're not. You stuff the straw into a big linen sack if you've got one. If not, you just kind of rake it into a man-sized lump and pray that no beetles have claimed it overnight. Some people add feathers. You do not have feathers, you have twigs, blankets, wool if you're lucky, burlap if you're not. Sometimes, if it's extra cold, you sleep under a spare cloak, a fur, or, most realistically, another human being. Bonus points if neither of you mind the smell of turnips and disappointment. The bed fits 2 adults, a child, and at least 1 unauthorized chicken. Nobody gets personal space. That's not a concept yet. Now, seating. You want something to sit on near the fire, ideally without becoming part of it. Enter the stool. It's 3-legged, wobbly, and made from a single plank nailed to whatever was left of that tree you chopped in Chapter 3. It squeaks. It tilts. You use it anyway. There's no back support, no cushioning, you're not resting, you're just changing your vertical suffering into horizontal suffering. If you're lucky, you have a bench. If you're really lucky, it doesn't collapse when 3 people sit on it at once. Benches are multi-purpose. You sit, you eat, you nap, you step on it to reach the roof when the smoke flap gets stuck. You store things underneath it like turnips and regrets. It is both furniture and lifestyle. The table is a rare creature. If it exists, it's small, low, and uneven. A slab of wood on 4 legs, one of which is shorter and replaced by a rock. It's not for meals, those happen wherever there's room. It's for doing things like sewing, mending, carving, or staring blankly at your hands while wondering if the goat just chewed your good sock again. Speaking of the goat, let's talk about shared living arrangements. Yes, your animals live in your house. You don't have a barn, you are the barn. The pig sleeps near the door. The chickens roost in the rafters. The goat wanders freely and occasionally screams at nothing. This isn't a design flaw, this is strategy. Animals produce warmth and, more importantly, dung, which you use for daub, fuel, and occasionally revenge. You try to keep your space separate. You build a little divider, a plank wall, a lattice, maybe just a strategically placed bench and a glare. The animals ignore it. The goat walks over it. The chickens fly over it. The pig collapses against it with the slow gravity of a tired boulder. You sigh and scoop up the droppings like it's just part of the routine now. Because it is. Let's explore storage, which is a polite word for putting things in piles and hoping you remember which pile is which. You've got baskets, woven from rushes, reeds, or despair. You've got sacks, linen, if you're fancy, reused grain bags, if you're real. Maybe a chest, if you inherited something or knew a carpenter who owed you a favour. It holds everything valuable, extra clothes, family relics, 3 spoons, a candle stub, and that one cup no one's allowed to use because it's the good one. There are pegs on the walls for hanging cloaks and tools. Some fall out, some creak, some were installed at the wrong angle because you were cold and angry and guessed. Above the hearth, you hang pots, pans, and the bundle of herbs you keep insisting is for cooking, but mostly just makes the smoke smell slightly more confused. And of course, lighting. Your choices are as follows. Fire, a fire that's smaller, or a tallow candle with a wick that leans to one side like it's seen too much. You place your candle on a little iron holder or the least uneven surface you can find. You light it. The room glows weakly, casting long shadows on your walls and highlighting the gentle flicker of dust, spiderwebs, and whatever that thing was you tried to forget in the corner. You don't move after lighting the candle. You sit, you squint, you contemplate the concept of ambience, then snuff it out because tallow costs money. On the wall, you might hang a religious image, a carved cross, a crude painting, something to remind you not to scream during thunderstorms. Maybe you've got a bundle of dried herbs, both as decoration and as a vain attempt to deodorize the layers of floor rot. They hang there, cheerfully failing. There's no organization system, no drawers, no shelving units. If you have a book, it is a miracle. If you have more than one bowl, you are considered wealthy. Every object you own has 3 jobs. The stool is also a table. The table is also a ladder. The ladder is also a shelf. Your entire inventory fits in a blanket. You are the IKEA showroom, minus the lighting, labels, and structural integrity. As for style, let's call it proto-rustic chaos. Everything is brown, not on purpose. That's just the colour of materials, filth, and time. The walls are streaked with soot, the daub flakes, the rushes go grey with age and sadness. You drape cloth over things, not for style, but because there's a hole or something underneath that bites. If you decorate at all, it's with function in mind. A gourd becomes a cup, a carved spoon becomes a toy, a twig bundle becomes a hat rack if you believe hard enough. Sometimes, on a clear day, you look at your space and think, this isn't so bad. The sun glows through the pig bladder window. The smoke rises instead of smothering. The chickens are quiet. The pig is asleep. Your bed looks vaguely inviting in the way that a pile of straw can sometimes feel like a cloud when you're tired enough to hallucinate. Then the goat knocks over the stool. The bench collapses. The stew spills. And you remember what it truly means to live in medieval elegance. You've got 4 walls, a hearth, a mattress made of weeds, and something vaguely shaped like furniture. Finally, home. For about 10 years, give or take a storm, a fire, or a passing horse sneeze. Congratulations! You did it. You built a house, with your hands, your back, and whatever shreds of hope remained in your soggy, frostbitten soul. It has walls, a roof, a door that mostly closes, a hearth that only occasionally tries to kill you, a floor that, let's be honest, has developed its own microbiome. But still, it's real, it stands, and you live in it. Take a moment, breathe it in. Now prepare to watch it slowly die, because this muddy, straw-topped miracle you clawed out of the swamp with spit and despair is temporary. It will not last forever. It will barely last a decade. Yes, the average medieval peasant house, even in its prime, had the structural lifespan of a pumpkin in the sun. About 7 to 15 years, if you're lucky, careful, and not struck by misfortune, fire, floods, rot, plague, neighbour envy, or gravity. And the moment you finish building it, the countdown begins. Let's start with the walls. Remember that lovely wattle and daub you slathered with your bare, shaking hands? That mix of mud, straw, dung, and shame? Yeah. That stuff cracks every season. In summer, it dries out and pulls away from the wood. In winter, it freezes, shifts, and falls off in chunks. In spring, it turns into a paste again. You are now in an endless game of patch and pray. You keep a bucket of daub handy, like other people keep bread. You wake up, look at the wall, and notice a hole. You didn't make that hole, it just happened. You smear more daub on it. 2 days later, the same spot crumbles. This continues until you give up and hang a blanket over it. That becomes your solution. A house made of mud and textiles. Welcome to fashion-forward decay. And then there's the roof, that charming thatch you spent 2 weeks assembling while sobbing softly into the rushes. It's rotting. Right now, as you read this, it holds moisture. It sags. It harbours entire societies of mice. The top layer starts to blacken. Mould creeps in. Birds begin using it as a dating site. The more it rains, the faster it dies. You patch it constantly. You climb up, adjust the bundles, press them tighter, and mutter ancient curse words. Sometimes you add a new layer. It doesn't help. Water finds the gaps. It always finds the gaps. Then it drips. On your bedding, your soup, your forehead at 3 in the morning. You scream. The roof listens, then collapses a little more. Don't forget the beams. The structural wooden parts of the house that support the whole operation like a skeleton made of damp regrets and half-finished prayers. You cut those timbers green, remember? Because time was a luxury you couldn't afford. What with winter coming, the roof leaking, and that surprise plague in the next village over. You didn't have the patience, or the landowner's permission, to season them properly for 2 years like a real craftsman. So now they're warping, bending, splitting in ways that make your hairline recede by the hour. Some of those beams are twisting in place like they're trying to escape the house entirely, or at least apply for a better job at a monastery. One starts to lean ominously, like a drunk uncle at a feast. Another develops a lovely, terrifying crack that you can fit a coin in. A big coin, possibly a goat. And because the whole structure is settling unevenly on your charming, non-existent foundation, a foundation mostly consisting of optimism and mud, the weight starts to shift. Like the entire house is suddenly suspicious of you. The frame bends, walls lean. The door that used to fit, sort of, now doesn't at all. It hangs like a crooked grin, opening itself with every gust of wind. You kick it shut. It sighs and opens again, like it's given up on privacy. One day it jams so hard, you nearly rip it off the hinges trying to get inside. You consider the pig hole, the small opening at the base of the wall you swore was just for ventilation, and definitely not an entry point for your soon-to-be neighbour. You look at the pig hole, you look at the jammed door, you sigh, you crawl through. Now you're using the pig hole on purpose. You tell yourself it's rustic charm, you lie, but hey, at least you're inside. Barely. Welcome home. Let's talk mould. You've got it. Everywhere. On the walls, in the corners, on that one cloth you forgot to dry properly in August. Your rush floor is fermenting. Your bedding is slightly spongy. The back of the house smells like mushrooms and despair. You scrape it, you cough, you move your sleeping mat further from the wall. The mould follows. It is patient. Insects thrive. Fleas, mites, beetles. The straw you sleep on is now a bug buffet. Your beams are delicious to woodworms. You don't know they're there until you poke the frame and your finger goes straight through. You stare at the hole. You fill it with daub. You tell no one. And oh, vermin. The rats love your home. It's warm, soft, and full of corners. They party in your thatch, dig tunnels through your floor, and throw tiny raves in your food storage. You set traps. They learn. You poison one. 10 more arrive. You accept them as roommates. You name them. One of them owes you rent. Then the maintenance begins. Every season, something breaks. Every rain, something leaks. Every frost, something cracks. You repair constantly. You mix new daub. You patch the roof. You replace a timber that gave up and fell on your cousin. You stuff straw in the holes. You realign the door with a rock and blind optimism. This isn't living, this is survival by carpentry. And here's the worst part. Sometimes it's not enough. A big storm rolls in, a flood creeps up the floor, your roof lets in half the river. The walls go soft, you watch chunks of your house melt before your eyes like it's made of tragic gingerbread. One morning, the northeast corner collapses, just folds inward like a cardboard box. You stare at it, you say, okay, and then you put a bench in front of the hole and keep living there anyway. Until eventually, you realize it's not fixable. You've patched every patch. You've replaced every beam. The roof is 3 layers of straw and denial. You look around and see a rotting, collapsing, mouldy shell of what was once your proud little peasant nest. You sigh. You step outside. You pick a new spot. You gather sticks. And you start again. Because that's what medieval housing was. Temporary shelter. Built fast. Abandoned faster. Your parents built theirs. You built yours. Your kids will build theirs, possibly in the exact same spot, right on top of your current house. With luck, they'll find your old spoon and ask, was great-granddad always this into mud? So, yes, you built a house, you lived in it, you watched it crumble around you like a pastry of suffering, and in 10 years, or 5, or 3, you'll do it all again. That's medieval home ownership, a celebration, immediately followed by doom. Your house is decaying in real time. But here's a silver lining. You didn't suffer alone. Medieval life was a team sport, and everyone got covered in mud together. Which brings us to the joy of community construction. Equal parts teamwork and group therapy. Here's something no one tells you about medieval construction. You're not doing it alone. Not really. Because as much as you'd like to believe you're a solitary mud warrior, bravely forging your destiny with straw and suffering, the truth is far more communal and way louder. If you want a house, you're going to need help. And that means people, and that means chaos. In the 14th century, peasant building isn't a one-man job. It's a group project where no one read the assignment, half the class is drunk, and the rest showed up because they heard someone was making stew. Let's say your old house collapsed again, or maybe your parents finally kicked you out of their collapsing house. You announce you're building your own, not with fanfare, just a grim nod to a passing neighbour while standing in a field with a stick and some intent. Gonna put up a frame next week, you mutter, and that's all it takes. They show up, not out of excitement, not because they love you, but because they know they'll need you when their pig eats a wall or the thatch collapses mid-feast. It's mutual aid, born of mutual threat. If you help today, you'll have help next season. If you don't, well, enjoy rebuilding your daub hut alone, in the dark, while Jeff walks by pretending he doesn't see you. The first build day arrives. People trickle in like reluctant ants. Cousins, neighbours, the guy with the limp who insists he's great with wattle, a widow with a hammer and a stare that dares you to question her structural opinions. Children who are more hazard than help. One man shows up with 3 goats and a loaf of bread, announces he's supervising, then sits on a stump and judges everyone's posture. Still, the work begins. Timber is lifted, holes are dug, rope is pulled. Everyone is yelling slightly different instructions. Nobody agrees what straight looks like. One guy insists on doing things the old way, which may or may not involve consulting a chicken. You share everything. Tools, food, complaints. There's only one decent axe, and 3 people want it. The saw is dull. Someone brought a tool that nobody recognises, and instead of admitting ignorance, everyone just silently agrees it's cursed and hides it under a tarp. Tasks get divided based on who looks the least tired. If you pause too long to wipe sweat from your face, you're reassigned. If you appear competent, you're suddenly the foreman. You did not ask for this role. You are immediately blamed when the frame lists 11 degrees to the left and someone falls into the daub pit. Everyone's talking. About the weather, about the wood, about who used too much dung in the plaster mix, about local gossip, mostly involving whether Maud is pregnant or just carrying turnips under her apron. It's an unending chorus of voices, punctuated by goats yelling and the occasional child screaming after nailing their tunic to a beam. Meals are communal. Bread, cheese, stew. You sit on logs or the ground or an inverted bucket that's also someone's toilet when flipped the other way. The stew has questionable meat and a hint of ash. You love it. Hunger makes anything taste like joy. So does eating with people who also smell like fear and wet bark. The mood is strangely warm for about 90 minutes. Then someone insults someone else's beam placement and things spiral. Arguments are common. You'll fight about wall height, about whose thatch bundles are too small, about how someone, Jeff, hasn't actually done anything besides pick mud from his teeth and criticise the pitch of the roof. But then someone sings, or plays a pipe, or dances in the mud, and everyone laughs. And for a brief moment, it almost feels like a festival. You forget you're working. You forget your spine is shaped like a question mark. You just build together. It goes faster with many hands. The frame rises in a day. Wattle is weaved before sunset. The daub begins to fly. You laugh, you argue, you patch mistakes. A child falls asleep in the straw pile. Someone tells a story about a haunted hut. You ignore it. Mostly. By day 2, you're exhausted. You've sprained something important. You've inhaled more ash than food. The walls are lumpy, the roof is uneven, and the goat keeps trying to eat the measuring stick. And still, you're grateful. Because without these people, your house would still be a hole in a field. Now it's a hole with walls, and a roof that sort of wiggles when the wind hits it just right. Eventually the house is done. Not in a modern sense. There are still gaps, the door doesn't fit, and the corner leans. But in a peasant sense, it's standing, it's not on fire, and it makes the wind go around you instead of through you. That counts. Everyone packs up. The widow takes her hammer, the goats are corralled, the children are scraped clean, there's handshaking, grunting, maybe a hug if nobody saw it. You thank them, they nod, they say, "You're helping me next month." And you will, because you owe them, because you need them, because this is how it works. Medieval construction isn't about architecture, it's about relationships, held together with straw and silence. You help because you must, because the world is cold and the wolves are real and winter is always a month closer than you want it to be. So you share tools, share food, share the agony of putting up a wall only for it to fall on Jeff because he leaned on it while bragging. And yes, it's loud, messy, infuriating, but it's also one of the rare moments in medieval life where you remember you're not alone in the mud, you're all in it together, screaming, coughing, building. Then, just as you're starting to relax, someone taps your shoulder and says, "Hey, you want to help raise a barn next week?" And you nod. Because of course you do. So everyone helped. Sort of. Some more than others. But if you think everyone got credit for it, think again. Especially if you're a woman, in which case you built half the house and got blamed for the other half falling down. In medieval construction, labour wasn't split fairly. It was split functionally, which is historian speak for whoever's already doing all the work gets more of it. And yes, that means women. While men got the glory of lifting beams and injuring themselves in publicly visible ways, women were often knee-deep in daub, straw, children, firewood, and low-level rage. The medieval gendered workload was basically a group project where one person mixed mud, made dinner, soothed 3 babies, and still got blamed when the roof leaked. So let's break it down. Who built what? Well, you could say everyone, but unequally and with layered exhaustion. Sure, medieval society had clear ideas about who was supposed to do which tasks. Men were expected to handle the heavy structural work, cutting timber, raising the frame, climbing precariously high things while yelling and occasionally bleeding into the foundation. That was considered man's work, because if you fall off a roof, apparently it counts as heroism if you do it with a beard. But let's talk about the rest of the job. The stuff that wasn't glorified or carved into stone reliefs. The endless, grinding, uncredited labour that made a house livable, or at least slightly less lethal. Women did that. They gathered materials, mud, straw, water, rushes, fuel, herbs, stones. They transported it all, sometimes while pregnant, often while carrying an infant on their back, and frequently while also trying to stop a toddler from licking the daub mix. They helped build walls, literally. Daubing wasn't some side job, it was critical work. Slathering cold, wet mud onto flimsy wooden slats to insulate your walls against winter death required precision, effort, and the ability to ignore your back pain and the sound of goats chewing your sock. And because wattle and daub homes constantly decayed, this wasn't a one-time thing. It was seasonal, maintenance was never-ending. And guess who patched the walls when they cracked, sagged, or fell off in soggy clumps? Women, usually alone, sometimes while also cooking, cleaning, tending the fire, preparing food, and screaming at Jeff's kids to stop poking the pig. There's a myth that medieval women weren't involved in construction, that they just stayed inside and spun wool while the menfolk did the real work. It's nonsense. You think a peasant household could afford that kind of division? If you had a body and it functioned, you worked. Period. Nobody got to opt out of survival. If a timber needed lifting and no adult men were nearby, guess what? The nearest woman lifted it, and then made lunch, and then fixed the hole in the wall the timber just made. Even tasks seen as more domestic had direct consequences for construction. For instance, firewood gathering. That's not just prepping dinner. It's keeping the fire going so the daub dries properly and doesn't fall apart. It's ensuring the house doesn't fill with smoke so thick it peels the soot off your ceiling and your consciousness. Women handled fuel. Fuel handled heat. Heat meant survival. And let's not forget roofing. That beautiful, mouse-filled, rain-absorbing pile of straw and rot. Thatching may have been considered men's work officially, but when it came to repairs, women were there, climbing onto the roof with bundles of straw, adjusting bundles, tying them in place with hands numb from cold and overuse. And when a roof failed, when the water leaked directly into the bed because the thatch slipped after a storm, everyone blamed the woman of the house. Because ultimately, in medieval society, the woman's job was to make the home work. No matter how unfairly the structure was built, how shoddy the materials were, or how drunk her husband got halfway through Wall 2, if the place felt drafty or cold or mouldy or vaguely haunted by the ghost of poorly mixed daub, that was her fault. She was the one responsible for keeping house, even when the house in question was half straw, 40% damp and fully on fire. But despite all this, women rarely show up in the historical record as builders. Their names aren't etched into contracts. They aren't credited in legal documents about land and structures. When a house was listed, it was almost always under the name of the male head of household, even if he was more ornamental than functional. Even widow-led households, plentiful in plague years, got written out. A woman could manage a farm, supervise construction, hire labourers, tend animals, raise children, and still the record would say, House of John's widow, as if her only skill was losing a husband. This invisibility wasn't because they didn't do the work. It's because no one wrote it down. No one thought it was remarkable that women were hauling timber, mending roofs, building fences, rethatching coops, and turning mud into insulation with their bare hands. It was just expected. Silent labour, endlessly repeated, performed without thanks and forgotten without pause. Let's also take a moment to appreciate the emotional labour of medieval home building. No, really. Because while the men argued about beam angles and took breaks to dramatically hold their lower backs and sigh, women were managing the people side of the project. Feeding workers, comforting children, calming livestock, managing schedules, hosting neighbours, mediating disputes about who stole whose chicken or whose axe broke whose toe. It was like being a therapist, chef, foreman and babysitter all rolled into one, and then expected to clean up afterward. And then there were expectations. Women were expected to keep the fire burning, keep the walls standing, keep the bedding dry, keep the children alive, all in a structure made of literal filth and disappointment. And if any of it went wrong, it was because she didn't try hard enough. Your floor is swampy, you should have layered the rushes better. Your hearth collapsed, maybe you didn't sweep enough. Your child caught lung rot from the back corner again. Have you considered not breathing in mould? All this, while also being legally and economically powerless, couldn't own land, couldn't inherit unless everyone else died first, couldn't sign a contract unless someone squinted really hard and pretended she was a man in poor lighting, and yet, without women, no house was ever truly functional. It might stand, but it wouldn't work. So when we talk about medieval homes, let's stop pretending they were built solely by men swinging axes in slow motion against a backdrop of Gregorian chants. The truth is messier, mud-covered, quietly heroic. Medieval houses were built by communities, but they were held together by women, by their labour, their hands, their breath, and their daily battle against gravity, weather, and everyone else's incompetence. So next time someone points at a quaint thatched cottage and sighs dreamily, remind them, a woman probably patched that roof, while pregnant, while cooking, while telling Jeff to shut up about proper beam alignment, and she didn't get credit, but she got it done. The beams are up, the fire is smoking, the floor is wet, your house is crooked but alive, and so are you. Let's spend one final day inside it, listening to the wind, counting the rats, and trying to sleep with a pig in your elbow. You wake up coughing, again, not violently, just the gentle, affectionate kind of coughing that comes from breathing soot for the better part of a decade. The rushes beneath you rustle with every shift, dry on top, damp beneath, like a haystack made of lies. Your blanket smells like smoke, mould, and one long-dead rat. You pull it tighter. It doesn't help. The air is cold and wet, not cool, not crisp. Cold like the breath of a mouth that forgot how to be kind, and wet like the corner of your bed that touches the wall, which shouldn't be wet, but always is. You pretend not to notice. Again, there's light outside, sort of. Grey, ashen, filtered through a pig bladder window that's supposed to let in the sun, but mostly just reminds you what damp glasslessness feels like. The inside of the house glows faintly. The smoke from last night's hearth still hangs low, like it's unsure whether to leave or move in permanently. You sit up. Your knees crack. Your back makes a noise not found in nature. Something small scurries away. Probably a mouse, possibly a child, could be the goat. You blink the soot out of your eyes and brace for the first existential crisis of the morning. The floor greets you warmly, by which we mean it's cold, slimy, and textured with something unidentifiable. You wiggle your toes. They sink slightly. The rushes are moulding again. You make a note to add more, right after you finish the other 47 tasks that must be done before sunset, assuming you don't get distracted by a roof leak, spontaneous pig drama, or death. You stoke the fire, or rather, you attempt to. You prod the ashes, blow gently, whisper encouragement. The embers gasp and wheeze like they're trying to retire early. Eventually, you coax out a flame. It smokes. A lot. Your lungs sigh. The smoke hole isn't working again. The flap froze in place. You curse quietly. Someone else stirs under a second pile of rushes. Your spouse or your cousin, or both, depending on how small the house is and how closely everyone had to huddle last winter. A child sits up, coughs, and steps barefoot onto the same sticky patch you just vacated. A shared scream is narrowly avoided. Breakfast is boiled grain and a sigh. It tastes better than nothing, which is what you had yesterday. The stew from last night congealed into a shape you'd rather not define. You reheat it anyway. The pig investigates. You shoo it with a broom that has one working bristle left. Outside, the wind howls like it's practicing for a role in your next mental breakdown. Inside, everything creaks. The walls shift with the cold. The door shrinks just enough to not shut properly again. You shove a rock against it. It rocks back. You accept this. You sit on the stool. The stool groans. You groan louder. The table is slanted and missing a corner, stolen last year to fix the hole in the wall behind the fireplace. You meant to replace it. But then winter came, and the rain came, and the thatch needed retying, and you got a boil on your leg, and now the hole is part of the decor. The animals begin their morning routine. The chicken lays an egg in the bed straw. The goat tries to chew the door again. The pig rolls over dramatically, snorts at your lack of ambition, and returns to snoring. A rat darts across the rafters. Everyone pretends not to see it. The roof drips. Not quickly, just enough to be noticed. A steady, meditative plop into a bucket that used to hold barley. You position another pot underneath. The ceiling groans in protest. You stare upward and mutter, "Just wait till spring," like it's a threat. You tidy, sort of. You shuffle objects from one damp surface to another. You sweep the rushes with the broom stump. You scatter some dried herbs to mask the smell of whatever died in the corner last autumn. It helps for about 6 seconds. Then everything smells like time-flavoured despair again. The rest of the day is work. Chores, repairs, fires to build, tools to find, water to fetch, neighbours to avoid, children to unstick from walls. Daub to patch, even though it's too cold to dry properly. You smear it on anyway. It falls off an hour later. You laugh without smiling. Someone stops by. A neighbour. They ask if your lintel is still slanting. You say yes. They nod, knowingly. It's a universal peasant gesture. We too suffer with dignity and inadequate structural support. You exchange turnips and complaints. They leave. You kind of miss them already. By evening, you're exhausted. Not the good kind, the kind that lives in your spine and whispers that you'll never finish all the things before the next roof beam surrenders to gravity. You sit by the fire and stare into it like it owes you something. It doesn't, but it crackles sympathetically. Dinner is whatever you scrape together with one pot, no enthusiasm, and a hint of mould. You eat it anyway. You share it with the goat. You don't look at the goat. You know what it did to your cloak last week. You're still grieving. Night falls. The wind returns. The fire dies a little too early. You wrap yourself in every cloth you own. You pray the roof holds. You tuck in the child. The pig settles beside the hearth, radiating heat and barnyard judgment. The chicken takes its usual spot above the doorframe. The rat watches from the thatch. You lie down. The straw pokes you in new places. You find a patch that's mostly dry and pretend it's comfortable. You listen to the creaks, the drips, the snores, the wind, the occasional mouse scream. You think, this is home. And you almost mean it, because despite everything, the cold, the smoke, the goats, the mould, the fact that your ceiling is sagging and your floor might be sentient, you're here, alive, in a house you built, or at least glued together with desperation and wet mud. It's crooked, it's falling apart, it smells like 5 different animals, but it's yours. You close your eyes, you breathe, you cough, and you dream of a roof that doesn't leak. And so, weary builder, we reach the end, smoke-stained, daub-covered, and held together by straw, spit, and stubbornness. You've survived collapsing beams, screaming goats, thatch rot, and communal emotional breakdowns. You now know what it means to truly suffer, in style. Thanks for watching. If this muddy madness made you laugh, groan, or feel deeply seen by a pig in your kitchen, then we've done our job. Drop a comment, maybe your favourite part of medieval home charm, or just type, I live, I leak, I learn. More rickety tales and historically questionable joy await to the left. Until next time, may your daub dry smooth, your roof stay rat-free, and your floor remain mostly solid. Cheers, and see you in the next disaster.